All right, what you got, Meta?
Uh, okay, so it's not Pathfinder, which is great and awesome, but it is something different. I actually want to talk about Canon versus AU, and I kind of actually made mention about this when we were talking about Pathfinder, but there are some games that are kind of ingrained in their lore, and their lore can affect it just as much as I guess as a game with somebody who's like, DM'd one, brought up, like made their own world and whatnot. So it really can define like how players might react within that world. I mean, the biggest example I can give is like L5R is the storylines, the lore, the history of the game have a huge impact when you're playing a game now. I mean, so the point where you actually will tend to play games at certain points of timeline, which can affect them. But there are times where that can also be a problem, and you end up having like a game where you'll want to run a game with really experienced players, but they end up knowing everything. So I was wondering if you guys have ever played a game and have decided, instead of playing the game as you know it, instead of playing what everybody knows, what everybody has already understood about the lore of that game or the storylines before it, have you ever jumped to AU, an alternate universe, played the game where it's like, now I can change anything I want, say it's an alternate universe, and run it off as like that? And what was your experience with that? And did you think it was better or worse than what potentially was in the canon world from the start?
I'll let Mal go first.
I mean, most of like the D&D games I've played have been in home settings. Like almost, I don't think I've ever really played a canon setting, outside of like I guess the modules we've run.
I know.
Yeah, it's
I
just
know
not canon's not my default, I guess.
I know, like generally when I play like a Pathfinder D&D game, because the worlds are because not only are the classes and whatnot so very like neutral in their terms, so that
Right.
they're friendly like regardless of the world that you put them into. It's easier for that, but then like you get into games like I mean, I'm just gonna jump back to power. It's the easiest one to really use. So I'm gonna pick on. You get into games like L5R, and to pull it into an AU is not as easy because a lot of what makes those classes and what makes the families and what makes the lore is the fact of what's gone on with the storyline.
I guess, but they also have books for about AUs.
That is true too. They do have like AU
Plus,
settings.
I mean, the obvious thing is that we all met in an AU.
That
Yes,
is actually
I've created
that
an
is
AU for Elva,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
I have interesting opinions on this.
In general, I think I think a DM is able to at any point, and the players, I mean, should probably understand that he could change whatever. Maybe this troll does not regenerate or lose its regeneration if it gets hit by fire for some reason, right?
Yeah.
Like, because I mean, you eventually, yeah, after you play a setting enough, you can kind of metagame it without even instinctively thinking about it. Like, because that's a common thing in like our D&D games. Whenever like a troll would come around, we'd all make sure to do fire and acid, but without necessarily even thinking if our characters would have known about that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's just something that happened on reflex.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is like when you get into a canon game, there's just a point where players start to pour their knowledge into the character, and it's not like out of maliciousness or anything.
Right.
It's just that they've seen it so many times, or it's come up so often, or they've been with the game for so long that they just instinctively know what to do.
Yeah, that's why I always ask for skill checks whenever that kind of stuff comes up. It's like, hey, can I make I know out of character this thing's weakness, can I make like a skill check to see if my character knows it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, but I just think a GM should or whatever should be able to change that without like with whatever, like even like, which I guess is almost like creating a minor AU in the moment, or maybe it's just a weird
mutation,
abomination, or version of whatever you're fighting. In that regards,
people don't be giving your GMs crap over that stuff too.
Right. Exactly.
You metagaming a bunch of bastards.
Yeah. It's I've seen like there's points where, and it's like there are some players who are good about it. You'll get like the moment where like as you said, Mao, they'll or not Mao, Obs, where they'll say like it's okay if I try to learn about it. But even then, like even if they can't expose a weakness, they might not perform an action. Like the Tarask is a perfect example of a creature that many people are familiar with, even though they've never really faced it. Where it's like, okay, I probably shouldn't throw a spell at it because it turns out it has spell reflection and shit on it, and I won't do that. But your character wouldn't know that, so your character's default will be like, oh shit, giant creature, cast a spell at it. But you as a player may not. So even if you don't need to look up what it's not weak to, you might instinctively know that's not an option.
I'd totally be that guy who casts a spell at it.
I would too.
Fireball time, boys. No, what are you doing? You know this thing. My character doesn't. I've never seen one of these.
5th edition Tarask is also a thing where like GMs should be allowed to do what they want, because technically, by the rules, it has no ranged attack.
Yeah.
So people are like, so if I can move slightly faster than it and just shoot a bow and arrow at it for 8 hours, I can kill it at level 1 or whatever.
I would love to see somebody do that.
Right. It's like, well, the GM should just be allowed to just grab a giant thing of earth and chuck it at that person. Right?
Yeah.
There's no reason it can't just because it's not in its stat block.
No, I absolutely agree. So, I mean, those are always minor iterations on a creature, and it may not even be so much an AU at that point, but it is doing exactly what that it is that it is changing it from what it is canonized source of to giving it something new or different, so that players have something fresh and new to look at, or be like, oh shit, we don't actually know everything it can do.
Plus, I mean, in tabletop RPGs, there's no way, we're at 10 years of Pathfinder, and you can't mention every little thing, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just you can't. You're limited by book space or whatever layout space, and you can't get everything you might want to include in a creature stat line or something.
Yeah,
or
that's
the
true
city
too.
Stat line or what else? I was going to say something. I left my brain.
Class stat line?
No, I forgot what I was going to say. Also, yeah.
You lost it, man.
Yep.
What? Let's hear from you though, Obs. Let's hear from you, because you have done a lot of AU stuff.
Yeah, I have.
The rest of us.
I mean, there's always the D&D. It seems like every game's AU. I don't think I've ever played in a specific. No, I take it back. I have played. Well, I barely count this. I mean, it's not an actual canon setting for D&D, but it was Middle Earth. I played a D&D game in Middle Earth. That was only a few sessions, but that's not an actual D&D setting. But I've never played it in any of the base D&D settings. I guess the kind of love for AU, particularly in L5R, has the first L5R game I ever played, which was really the game that got me into role playing in the first place. Was a canon first edition L5R game where it was clan war. Here's your base setting, and my GM who runs it, the other GM who runs L5R other than me, every time he does a game, we move on to the next era of the AEG stat block. So the next game we played was the War Against the Lying Darkness, the War of the Shadow, but the setting had changed so much based on what our characters had done in the first game, so we established an AU. So in that game, Dagotsu ended up becoming a bigger player first. When Totori became a shadow spawn and went all woo and went off, Dagotsu basically was like, well, that lasted pretty well for all of 5 years. I'm the Hante. Here I am. And became the Emperor. And now we're talking about playing a game after that'll be set in the War of the Spirits in the Four Winds saga.
Holy shit.
And it's all based on our characters, because some of our characters in the first game and some of the other, and we play side games that were also in the clan war, there would always be one person that got infected by the shadow or something. In my first game, it was Reiji, who's my first L5R character, got shadow tainted. So in the shadow game, he was one of the villains. And there was always a PC or somebody that was shadow tainted at every game. And there was basically a party of shadow villains that was moving against us in the shadow game. So we had this whole AU thing. So, I mean, I kind of always had a love for AU Rokugan, because I haven't played in base Rokugan a lot other than Winter Court games for the most part. So, yeah, you probably heard us talk about this on the podcast a few times, but we all met playing a game called Rokugan High School, which is a basically modern take on L5R with that borrows heavily from the lore of towards the end of the AG era. So some of the clan champions and stuff from there around. But we played. We're in our fourth one now. We played like basically 5 games in the universe. The setting is reset a few times, so whatever. But I'm not going to give you like a deep rundown of the lore of RHS.
As far as it matters for it, it's been about effectively 4 games. Regarding it, so
4 games of like lore that has been established. So, it's just kind of coming up with new stuff and affecting the setting has always been a kind of thing, and 4th edition has always been about L5R your way. So, I kind of like doing AU stuff, especially as a GM, because you don't. I mean, in a lot of ways, any game you kind of run is going to take on a lore of its own, and like kind of what Mal was saying, become AU on its own merits, but that doesn't necessarily feel constrained to follow the plot beats or what have you. So I can take like leading up into Onyx edition of L5R before AEG sold the game and run a Third Day of Thunder game out of it, or what have you, and then have the events of that game affect the game we're playing now. And Meta's been helping me GM this. Meta and Tets have been helping me GM this game. Probably something they've seen a lot, conflict-wise, based on stuff that happens in the lore with the players, is how the setting has changed based on the past games and what players new to the modern Rokugan setting that we've been running don't know about that have happened in the past. So that's always where it comes interesting, especially when you start. This game branches off this game. This one branches off this and this and this. And if you don't have like a established AU lore, I guess it can get kind of difficult for some newer players. But that is my experience, and I generally love running AU stuff, especially for L5R. So
I actually like AUs, and truth be told, I actually enjoy like home world games and whatnot.
I do too,
because it's. For 2 reasons. The first reason, and this is again, for me, this is just the most prominent one when you look at like L5R, is that if you play a game off of L5R, and like in our instance, we've made RHS, this is a modern version, but it still pulls a lot from essentially past things, or players still pull information from the past game, because as far as they see it, it is just a continuation of a storyline of where AAG sold the game off. So everything in the past is canon. And there was a point I would love to like go back and kind of say, nah, this is an AU, so we're gonna mess things up a bit.
Yeah.
But that's not something that's just been done right now. But I like homeworlds specifically because that means both the GM and the players can enter with the same mindset of, this is not a world that you know everything about. Even if you might know a stat block of a creature, the GM can say that is not how it works in this world. But if you like to play, like if you play in Golarion for Pathfinder, you're setting at least non-verbally. I mean, every game should start off with the GMs and the players sitting down and talking like, this is the kind of game I want to run. This is like generally how I run things. Would you guys be cool with that? And then the players either say yes, no, circle 1.
Check yes or no.
Check yes or no. And they check
maybe
or.
Yeah. They always check for.
They always check or. So you get that. So you got like when you play in like the modern world, you do kind of whether you could agree with this or not, but you do kind of set the ideas that you are playing in a world that is established. You are playing in a world that does have history. So if a player is supposed to know something about that, they could reasonably look at a book that has something about that area that you might be in to look up that history, which means the GMs and the players have to kind of run off of that history together, which means that sometimes the GM is constrained a little bit to what has already been pre-established, but the players understand is kind of reality, which means that it can be good and bad. I mean, depending on how you take it is, but it does mean that you are kind of setting this idea that these things are going to be canon. This world is canon. And that this is the world you're going to, these are the kind of individuals you might see. This is the history of and whatnot. Obviously without saying it, but I feel like I need to just to cover bases. You can have a GM state like, yes, we're going to use Golarion. Yes, we're going to use the city. Yes, we're going to use this region of land. But beyond that, everything's different. But again, that requires communication between the GMs and the player. which is why I've always liked the AU, because the AU, again, is you just walk in and you mean like home game AU. You're just like, nah,
Nobody knows nothing.
Nobody knows nothing. You can't metagame jack diddly squat by accident or on purpose. You are coming into this game and you just know that you're going to play this class. You could probably do these shenanigans with this class, but you know that I could throw anything at you and you may not know what that exactly means. So that is definitely something I've really enjoyed about the AU. But there is an enjoyment of also playing in a canon world that when you get in there, everybody is kind of on the same footing. You don't have to teach your players everything about the lore. You don't have to. It's a little bit easier in a way on the GM and a little bit harder, because now the GM doesn't have to make this write up and give them players like past history information, things that their characters should know about a world that they know nothing of. You don't have to write about religions. You don't have to write about the current like political setting. You don't have to write about like, who are the guards, things that would be generally known about it. You don't have to write about like regions and create up areas and whatnot. Write up
It's
about
a lot
the
easier to just
cities
pick
and
up and
history.
play.
Yeah, it is a lot easier to pick up and play on that area, and it gives everybody a baseline to say, you can just literally say, go to this page, read these pages, this is the world, there you go. But as time goes on, that obviously has its ups and downs for some people. Some people may not care. Some people do a mixture of it. Some people it feels very constraining to. But I don't know. For me personally, I'm kind of like with on Mao on this one, and in a way with you as well, Obs. Is that I started with homeworlds, and that's how it's always been. It's never been really stuck to a lore of a game that's already there.
Yeah, and it's weird to talk to some people who have only played in core stuff. Like a lot of people who play in like they only role play in Adventurers League or Pathfinder
Society,
Pathfinder Society or what have you. You'll run across and sometimes play with those people at cons, and you're like, oh wow, they just have a different perspective on stuff.
It's very interesting because like I actually had the opportunity when I was younger to go to something like that, where it was full on. It was like Heroes of Rokugan, if you will, where it was like they had canon and lore and they were set up like this. And I don't remember if they were official or not. I honestly never cared enough. I was like, fuck yeah, I'm just going to get to play D and shit. And I was like, that's awesome. But they had a whole setup. They had history and whatnot and characters, and you had to sign up and you would play in essentially a Pathfinder Society style. And that's how you would roll, and that's how we did it for the weekend. But you learned that this world had settings and setups, and you had to kind of learn a little bit about the world before you could just dive in, because they did have things that would affect your character that you might know about or should know about. But it's always, it's really interesting to find this kind of people who are like, no, I've only played in a canon setting, or I've only played in like a society, or I've only played in a group that follows off of a very specific thing, and they've never played like at home. At least at home with your buddies over a made up world or whatever. They don't play that way. It's a very interesting experience to have those kind of two individuals come to a table.
Yep, and and like I said, those are the rare players from my experience. So it's just interesting.
Yeah,
that a lot of people actually, I mean, maybe it's just the people I'm exposed to, but that are playing alternate universe or home world, like homebrew settings for games.
Yeah.
So, and probably a lot of it's just the games you play too.
I think it is too. I mean, it's always going to be different depending on players.
D&D and Pathfinder lend themselves very well to just doing homeworld stuff in homebrew settings.
They do. Like one of the biggest things that, like I said it earlier, but like they have a lot of very friendly, neutral terms. Anytime that you read a book on something, they generally just give you an easy enough history to explain the area, but nothing to set truly any events at home. They might mention some great battle in the past, but beyond that, you're free to kind of do as you feel with it. So they're very friendly in that regard. But yeah, cool.
So AU wins.
They
win the great battle.
They win the great battle between Canon and Ape.
Yeah, one day when I have the gumption to do it, I'm going to come up with the actual timeline and history for the L5R modern setting.
I already got some ideas on that, so I plan once the game is over.
We'll collab on it.
Yeah, we'll collab.
All right.
Have lunch. We'll talk about it over lunch.
Yeah, we'll get some tea.
Yeah.
We'll bring our notes, compare and contrast.